should be live. And then for the future, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Right. Yeah, I think that's working. Okay. Hello, welcome to the Convince Me Otherwise show. This is the show where I will give you an opinion that I have on something, political or philosophical, and then anyone who disagrees with me is free to hop onto the Discord and then attempt to convince me otherwise. Today's show will be about genders. My proposition, which I'm going to put forward here, is that there are only two human genders, and anyone who disagrees with me is free to come on and try and convince me otherwise on that. I'm making sure not to say the other thing. So, who wants to? Well, actually, let's just go around the room first and see what other people's opinions are on this topic and get an idea of who agrees and who doesn't. So we'll start with Andy. What's your opinion?
Well, to me, gender seems a bit more nebulous than something like sex, in which case I think it's more clear that there are only two of that. But that's my basic thought on that. I think that sex and gender are not that there's zero relationship between the two, but they're not identical either. So I don't think it's so simple to say there's only two genders. So that's my basic thought on that.
Okay, so is it fair to say you disagree with me then?
I think so, yeah.
Alright. Doolittle, do you want to tell us what your position is?
I would say mostly agree. If you're talking about if you're talking about chromosomal, action, DNA, what's your biological equipment as well as what's inside of your cells in terms of instruction sets for your body to make those biological equipment. The vast majority of people fall into male or female. And some people have extra chromosomes or they're short chromosomes. Some people have certain epigenetic events happen after they're born, which makes them express different traits than they would have otherwise. And so there's things like, something called guavodosase in Central America, where people are born as females, and then they grow testicles when they hit puberty. So there's bizarre stuff like that that's in the rare fringes, but I think by and large, what you're talking about, there's males and females. Physiologically, that's almost entirely true. And then when you're talking about sociologically, I'm a little bit less convinced that we need binary roles. There's some people that never have children, and so saying what their gender role is doesn't make any sense. And then there's some people that, like, for example, stay-at-home dads, that maybe they play the role of the dad in some ways and they play the role of the mom in other ways. So I'm less convinced on that area, but I'd say like I 90% agree with you.
Sorry. Okay, thank you for that. We'll go to Fatai next. Are you there?
I would say historically that there definitely have been two genders, but I think that going into the new millennium, there are going to be people that are going to say that they're not of either male or of the female gender, and their argument is, that gender is a social construction, and that
a lot of new ones appear to have popped up over the last couple of years, don't they?
And they can say that they are whatever gender they want. So to really answer this question, we're going to have to define gender. If you mean like any physical actual traits that somebody has, then for the most part there are two genders. There's a very small amount of people that are born intersex, but they're basically null to be considered because they don't really. That's like they're not really that common. Um, um, but if you want to define gender as some more psychological idea, then I think you would have to the grant them their opinion that they are of a different gender.
Okay, thanks for that. Just going forward, how do I pronounce your name?
Fate.
Fete. Okay, right. Thank you. John J. Parker, are you online?
I am indeed. How you doing, Mace?
I'm okay, thanks.
Just okay. That's disappointing. Well, as for the topic, I basically agree with you. I think Fateh brings up a pretty good point. I know he just told you how to pronounce his name. I already forgot, so I hope that's right.
I think it was Fete, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I think you're basically right. I think the problem of defining what gender means is kind of the problem. Because as Fateh said, it's both been claimed to be synonymous with sex, it's been claimed to be a social construct, and it's been claimed to be an immutable psychological characteristic of how you view yourself. Now, all three of these things cannot be true at the same time. Um, if we're using the word correctly, I would say that the idea that it's I don't know. I'd say I basically agree. I think that people can make up a lot of different ways to self-identify, but at that point, you're really stretching the definition of gender. So I don't know. I don't really have much to disagree with you on here. I could play devil's advocate with you if we run out of challengers.
I don't
because
think we
I've
will.
argued
That'll
with
be fine.
because I've talked with a lot of people who subscribe to that third definition that gender is just a matter of self-identification. So I can play devil's advocate if we need to. It should be fun. But if we run out of challengers, but overall, I basically agree.
Okay. So yeah, we won't need you to play devil's advocate. It looks like we already have at least 2 or 3 people that partially disagree, if not fully. But if I think the way this works is now, since you agree with me, they've not just got the opportunity to convince me otherwise, but they've also got the opportunity to address you and any issues that you might have with what propositions they put forward. So you can still be involved. Oh, we've lost some people. All right, I was going to go to Travis. Are you there? Do you want to put your? Oh, you're deafened. Okay. Oh no, you're not deafened. Are you there? No. Okay, looks like Trav's not there. All right. Who wants to go? Should we start with Andy? Do you think you might know where we should start in changing the minds of myself and... Oh, John's gone. Okay. Sorry, keeping up there. Andy.
I mean, I guess
Sorry, yeah, what were you going to say?
I guess we could just talk about terms and ideas and these words that we're using to say that there's only 2 genders. It seems like we're basically what I guess I could ask you what tells you that, because it seems like that would be specifically based on sex rather than gender, and these terms seem to have become separate or are separate for some reason, because they are obviously related terms, but that doesn't mean they're identical in usage or meaning.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I really struggle to follow when people use gender and sex differently, because all my life growing up, they've always been the same thing. It's only till very recently some strange people have tried to make them different. But I can't understand what they mean by that. So I guess that may be something you're going to need to have to work around, unless you can perhaps explain to me what's going on there. But yeah, if you use those two words differently, I'm not going to have a clue what you're talking about, because they're the same thing to me.
Well, I mean, that association that you've had for most of your life isn't guaranteed to be the fact of the words themselves, like, because they have been used differently. I mean, the idea that culture and sex can be different is not really, though it's become sort of underneath a
Culture.
spotlight recently. Sorry?
Did you say culture and sex are different?
I gotta make this quick. Trav is right. There are only two genders because genders are a social contract and a social construct, and most people subscribe to them. Thus, accurate.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, what were you saying, Andy?
I was saying that although recently there's been something of a spotlight on these ideas, hence why we're talking about it, there's been more of a fixation than there would have been in this part of the world. The idea has existed in pockets that sex and gender are not always entirely like there has been existing cultural ideas, and it has been a concept. It's not so novel. It's not something that's just been invented this year.
Yeah, sure. I did do a bit of research on the topic myself because I was very interested, and obviously I wanted to be prepared before this stream. And it seems that the separation of sex and gender happened recently, I think in like the last 50 years or so, but it was only in some tight academic circles, and then only till around according to the article I read anyway, or I think it must have been around 2010, that started to leak out of academia into the public, which is why I've only just heard of it, because I'm not a professor. So yeah, this since around about 2010, this idea kind of just came out of nowhere for most people, and it goes against the English language. So if we're going to just use standard English, ignoring the change that these academics are trying to push, just regular old English, which everyone else understands, gender and sex are the same thing, and there's only two.
Well, I'm looking at a definition, and it says the behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one sex. So
yeah, I can find definitions. I can find definitions which I agree with too. So I'm not sure what your point is there.
What do you mean you could find definitions you agree with? This is a definition I found on Merriam-Webster.
Yeah, you can go on the internet and you can find a definition that meets your whatever you think that word should mean.
Okay, but this is
I
just
can go
the
on
first.
there and find an older definition, which I agree
just a
with.
cursory search on Merriam-Webster. It's not. I didn't have to dig around.
Well, according to what you just said, I don't agree with the Merriam-Webster definition.
Okay, well, if it's just so simple as us looking at definitions and deciding whether or not it's correct, I don't see where that gets us. Because I mean, at that point, you can just say, "Oh, well, that definition's bullshit," and it's.
Well, that's why I didn't really want it.
I would ask you why is that your diagnosis of that definition?
I don't want this conversation to get too hung up on semantics, and I don't think it really matters, because when I say gender, you know what I mean, right?
Well, when you say gender, it sounds like you mean what I would say if I said sex.
Okay, and do you agree there's
So
only
we're
two of
using
them?
words differently than respective to how each of them.
Whatever, I'm going to speak the English language, and then whatever translations you need to make in your head to understand me, you're free to do
But
that.
it's not a
So-
different language.
Can I-
It's just a
Can I
different usage of
interject here
words.
as a moderator for us for a second? I think there's two claims that are implicit in your claim that Mace. One of them is that gender is the same as sex.
Well, I didn't want the
Second.
conversation to be about that, really. I just wanted to talk about sexual
And then
dimorphism.
so there's sexual dimorphism. So you have one claim is that sex has there's two sexes, and then when you say there's two genders, that means that you're making two claims. One is that there's two sexes, and two is that gender is essentially the same as sex, in your opinion. Right? So if there's a totally third way that gender behaves that's not related to sex, then that claim that gender and sex are the same would be false. So you couldn't claim that there's only two gender because there's only two sexes. Does that make sense?
I'm trying to follow along.
Yeah, if sex and gender are the same thing, and you think there's two sexes, then you would also be correct that there's only two genders. But if sex and gender mean totally different things, and you believe there's two sexes, then you could also believe that there's more than two genders.
Okay.
I think like half of the argument here is proving that sex and gender are essentially the same things, or for the purpose of whatever you're analyzing, that they're equivalent.
Andy, I'm curious, do you think there are more than two genders?
Well, I mean, when I hear the word gender, I don't think sex. I think how somebody imagines, their identity, basically.
Okay.
A more
so is that a yes?
consensual, less biological type of description.
Yeah, don't worry about
Of how
semantics for a
somebody
minute. Just answer yes or no.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Are there more than two genders?
I would say so, yeah.
What are they called?
Well, I don't really know if well, the two things that I guess you could call genders that come to mind, that you could name, would be man and woman. And then if you want to say sexes, you'd say male and female. And oftentimes those labels do line up. Hey, it looks like we got a special guest here. We got Brian Rue. Hey, I was watching your video with Travis earlier.
Hi there. Yeah, we did one about 3 years ago.
Yeah, welcome aboard. Yeah, Travis said he could invite you. I'm surprised to see you in the very next day. Welcome.
Yeah, he just sent me an email, I guess, yesterday. I just saw it today, so I answered. I haven't been on Discord in years, so I'm not sure how it works. I guess I managed to get it okay.
You got it working?
Yeah. Yeah, so is
Brian,
Pangburn, is Travis here? I guess it's just the three of us?
Yeah, Travis is he's doing other stuff, but he's in the channel, so he might hear you. But at the moment, he's not in the conversation. But I think we wanted to get your take on Mace's question. His making a proposition that there is only two genders, and would like anybody that has evidence to the contrary to demonstrate to him otherwise. Is that the right language?
Well,
Yeah,
I agree
just so
there's
long
two
as
genders.
Convince me
what's
of
your
it.
take on it? Yeah, we'd like to hear your take on it, Brian.
Yeah, I think
to
there's
talk
two
about
genders, male and female. I think it's best to keep it that way and not have multiple genders.
Okay, good. Looks like we agree there. Andy was just explaining what names he would give to the other two. So you say there's male, female. What are the other ones, Andy?
Well, I was
Yeah.
I wish I was more of a of a scholar on this, Mace, but even though we do seem to have a disagreement, unfortunately I can't help you with how much I want to describe this, so forgive me for that. But the concept that I've heard that would disagree with you, and that seems to make some amount of sense to me, is the idea that, well, let's use men for as an example. The claim is often that male is sex, but then man is a different idea. Man is gender, and it's this more metaphysical sort of idea, and it has to do with what we associate with a male to be. But that doesn't always line up, and that's what.
You're talking about like machismo and rites of passage for manhood and things like that, as opposed to just having physical organs.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, like a separate idea that from what you are biologically.
Isn't
a more
a
conceptual idea.
Is it, well, so when I hear the word man, I think adult human male.
Right. Yeah, but if you think in terms of like
that?
Mace, if you think in terms of like an ancient tribe, like an ancient Paleolithic tribe that might have had, you know, in America every year having to go on a buffalo hunt, right? And there were different roles that members of those tribes played in the buffalo hunt, and the boys and the men would make weapons and stalk the buffaloes and get them to run off of a cliff in a herd stampede, and then the women would be at the bottom of the cliff and they would clean the carcasses and gather them, you know, debone the meat and put it all on sleds, and then they'd all go back to their homes after the hunt, right? And so there's like a male role in the hunt and there's a female role in the hunt.
Right.
And it's entirely possible that somebody with a vagina was up there with a spear, standing down the buffalo and getting him to stampede over the cliff. And it's entirely possible that somebody with a penis was down at the bottom, cleaning up the carcasses and deboning the meat and and doing the female role in the tribe, right? So the man is like, there's a rite of passage you go through, and there's a certain set of skills, and there's a certain set of things that you do in society that makes you a man. And then there's something contrary to that, or something that's the opposite of that females do that complement each other with the men. But it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your physical hardware. It's 90% overlap, but 10% of it is there's people that are just not suited to carry spears, that happen to be males, and they hang back with the females and do female type things. And there are women who are not suited to do the women things, and they are just as capable as men to do the men things. But like I said,
what you're talking about there, I would class as gender roles, and I'm an egalitarian. I don't believe that any roles should be restricted to certain genders. I think if you're able to do the job, then you should be able to do the job. I don't care what your gender is, but I don't think that's really relevant to this conversation.
Well, if the job is typically a female job, like pre-secondary education, right? Almost all grade school teachers are women, at least in America. It's not that, it might not be that everywhere, but in America, almost all pre-secondary education teachers are women. Almost all engineers are men.
What's wrong with that?
So no one says that a woman can't be an engineer or that a man can't be a teacher, but predominantly that's a gender role.
No, I don't think so. No one. You just said yourself, no one is stopping someone.
No, stopping it, yeah. I'm just saying, there are certain things that there's a 90% predilection for women to do and a 90% predilection for men to do, and there's some overlap, but it's not entirely overlap between gender roles and genders,
sounds to me like you
or personalities and genders.
regardless of our, I mean, I'm not even sure where we disagree there. Actually, it sounds like you're saying there are two genders anyway. You're just saying there are some similarities between them.
Yeah. I'm not saying there's not. Yeah, I'm just making distinction between sex and gender too.
What was the distinction?
So the distinction between sex and gender is that gen categorizes people based on their chromosomes, whether there's X and Y chromosomes or two X chromosomes, and the expression of those sex traits, as in breasts, vaginas, penises, any of the other sex traits, whether you go bald when you're in your early 20s. I mean, does that make sense? So that's what sex is. Sex is specifically what's in
sex is biological.
It's biological. It's what chromosomes are in your cells, and then how do you express that DNA?
Sorry, did someone just pop in and then pop out again?
This guy keeps popping in and then saying something, and then it was a clarification of what I was saying.
No,
sex is biological,
said that, right?
Yeah, it's biological. It's got nothing to do with what pressures society puts on you to do a particular role, or how smart it is for you to do that role, given your biological traits.
Okay, I'm not really sure what you're guessing out there, but let's move on. So, Andy, what are the different genders?
Well, I'm not really an expert on what the different genders might be, so I apologize for that.
Can
believe
you
it or
just
not,
name?
this doesn't come up
Can
very
you just name three?
Well, aside from men and women, I guess a third option would be the people who say they don't feel like they fit into either one of those. And I don't really see the reason to tell them that they're wrong when they say that.
So, what's the third one called? Just give me one more. So, we've got man, woman. Just give me one more gender.
So I would argue that there's two genders, but it's more of a spectrum in the same way that there's kind of a spectrum of
Damn, I don't have it.
extroversion to introversion.
Sorry, Fierce. Can you let Andy answer my question, please?
Sure.
I'll come to
I
you
don't know
later.
what the word
in
for.
support of.
I don't know what the word for the third gender is, but I know that there are people who just they personally don't feel like the word man or woman would be appropriate for them, and I don't really see much reason to tell them that they're incorrect about that.
Whoa. Okay.
How about gender fluid? I think that is a word.
Well, that's when you
could
feel
be
like
used.
you move between them.
Yeah.
So is
But
that
that could also be another example. And if
So-
somebody told me that, I also wouldn't feel the need to tell them they're wrong about
so is gender fluid a gender?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a gender, but I would say it's a term to refer to people that don't find themselves falling into a particular category. These people might be kind of in the middle, like maybe they're a hermaphrodite. Maybe these are people that you might approach thinking that they're biologically a female, and it turns out that they're biologically a male. Personally, I've been around people like this before, and I just kind of know, like there's like a little light bulb that goes off in my head somewhere, and I ask them, what are your pronouns? Because, I just get that feeling from looking at the person. I do think that there's only two genders, being like in the same way that there's gender roles, male roles and female roles. But some people do kind of fall in between. It's more of a spectrum. I would say, as a male, I have some effeminate qualities, but I'm definitely, a male. I play more to a male role in society, but I'm not a masculine man. I'm not like a Giga Chad. I have some effeminate qualities about myself. And then some of these people just, if someone falls in the middle, they have trouble, identifying where they fall into society because we haven't had these before. Historically, there are terms like mahu, which comes from Hawaii, for kind of someone who's kind of gender fluid in the middle. And they kind of find out when they're older at a certain age. Maybe they were born male. But there is a history to this. It's not just kind of a recent thing that, just kind of sprung out of nowhere.
It sounds like you think there are more than two genders. Is that correct?
No, I think that there's two genders, but I think giving a label to someone that kind of falls in between those two roles in the center can help those people be more comfortable, attaching something to their identity and, saying that I'm gender fluid or something like that. In the same way that, like, you would fall between being an extrovert or an introvert. I think I am a mostly introverted person. I stay inside more, but I definitely get energy from my friends. So I kind of fall into the range of 60% introvert, 40% extrovert. I'm not like a fully introverted person in the way that some people might not be fall fully into a masculine or feminine role in society.
I think that's what's that fallacy called where you compare apples and oranges? I can't remember what it's called, but you're comparing.
I think that's a fair analogy.
Yeah, because
can you tell me what's different about being extroverted and introverted?
What I was going to say was extroversion and introversion do exist on a spectrum, but that's a personality trait. All personality traits exist on spectrums, but personality types do not. You're either one type or you're another. And gender traits also, individually, each trait exists on a spectrum, but genders themselves, the gender types, do not exist on a spectrum. So,
but you pick that type based off of which
comparing gender. You're comparing gender types to personality traits, so you're looking at two completely different levels and comparing them, which I don't think is fair.
Well, you're saying that there's personality traits and personality types, kind of like we use Myers-Briggs as like an example, like INFJ.
Yeah.
Right. I would say I'm INFJ, but I still I lean towards being introverted, and so I identify with being introverted. But if I was to find myself somewhere in the middle, then that'd be kind of, I don't strictly identify with one or the other. I could be, kind of in a fluid area there. And I think when it comes to gender, there's a lot of people, not a lot of people, but a small minority of people that kind of fall into that section. Whether they be like a hermaphrodite, for instance, someone that's born with multiple kinds of genitalia. Where does that person fall into gender?
So do you think hermaphrodites are a third gender?
I don't think that they're a third gender. I think that they just kind of are somewhere in the middle, and giving them maybe a label or something that they can attach to their identity and feel like they have a place in society.
Can't a hermaphrodite just be a male or a female with a genetic abnormality?
Well, what is I guess that's true. They still might waver one way or the other. Like you could be born with a vagina and then
they
just
always
a testicle
are. There's
somewhere.
never been a hermaphrodite in history which has been able to impregnate themselves, so they are one or the other.
Yeah, I say that you probably would always waver to one side or the other side, but that person is still going to struggle to really find what role they fit into in society if you're like, okay, pick one or the other, and they just really don't understand where to go.
Yeah,
I am totally in agreement that there's only two genders, but if people that kind of fall into that category want to have a label that kind of just helps them fit into society more, I'm not against that.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Like
I'm
you can call
not.
yourself an extroverted introvert.
Oh,
That's kind of
no,
what I
don't
call
do
myself
that.
in a way.
Nah. The thing is, a hermaphrodite. I mean, it's probably not very fun to be a hermaphrodite. I can imagine that would suck, but that's not because they're a third gender. That's because they have a disability. They're still one or the other. But it sounds to me like you kind of agree with
No,
me
no,
there
I
anyway.
kind of agree with you
Yeah.
in that regard, but I
Less.
still think that these people, like just like people that have autism or any other type, like we need, the wealth of the world's growing. There's more and more people, and I think finding a way that these people can fit into society better and be welcome and just kind of contribute is not. And if they want to do that through having a label, I don't think that label would be a third gender, but I think that would help them to find their place in the world and feel more welcomed.
Let's head over to Jolly. Jolly, what's your opinion on this? How many genders do you think there are?
I might actually have to go with our friend before me. What was your name? Sorry, mate.
Fierce Titans.
Yeah. Faintates. Yeah. I'm not looking at the video thing. Yeah. Faintates. I think there's a spectrum, perhaps, and because gender roles, as far as I know, a little about gender, gender is merely something that any individual feels like it's the neurochemical response to what it's not a physiological response. Usually, male and female, and
You're using some really big words there, which some of our audience members, certainly not me, just the audience members might not know what they mean. So perhaps you might want to explain those.
Excuse me for a moment, I'll be right.
Yep. So when you got you have man and woman based on say genitalia, which is sexual reproductive systems. So they have testicles and penises or vaginas, and that you can basically say this person is a man because they have reproductive systems that characterize a man. This person is a woman because she has a female set of reproductive organs. Whereas I think with gender, from what little I know, it's more about somebody having a neurochemical response to those to being in the body that they are. So they're kind of disembodied from their reproductive genetic setup, and they kind of go, well, I feel like a woman because I have quote unquote feminine traits that are of somebody in a male body or in a man's body, and so they might be female with a man's body, which is the whole transgender concept. So it's about somebody feeling that they're trapped in the opposite body, and
You're talking about gender dysphoria there.
That's correct, yeah, and that's where I guess right. I think the initiative for a lot of the psychological schools is now to not make that necessarily a psychological illness, but more a space where people can sort of have multiple genders, where they can remain with their bodies and and feel like a woman, and they're kind of trying to make that whole concept fluid and saying, well, it doesn't really mean anything, these are just roles. And in history, like if we look at like, let's say wearing makeup is a feminine trait, and if a guy wants to do that, they might say, oh, are you a female? So rather than saying that the one or the other, they've sort of created this sort of like what the other guy was saying, a middle ground where you're kind of 50% this, 60% that, and you can. It's based on your own neurochemical response. You can kind of sit in that middle ground somewhere, and yeah, I think that's about it. I think that's how I think gender works. It's just what people think they are, rather than what their bodies suggest they are. Is the point.
So, how
a
many
man
genders
doesn't
are
have to
there?
be a male. Sorry.
How many genders are there?
Well, I think like the other guy said, I think there's two, but there's probably a spectrum in the middle there where you feel.
If there's two, there
more-
can't be a spectrum. Two is
Well, I
binary.
think the spectrum's between those two genders. So there's
So there's
it's like hot
infinite
and cold.
genders then.
Yeah, so think about it like if you have a gradient that
Yeah.
goes from white to black, there's shades of gray in there that have specific
I would say
values
there
you
are
know.
infinite shades. Are there
Well,
infinite
actually-
genders?
Oh yeah, if that is how you characterize
Every single
those
person is
genders.
unique.
Yeah, well, and think about it this way. So there's hot and cold. I mean, if we realize that in the temperature gauge, there's no real such thing
I
as
would
hot
never
and
say
cold.
there are only two temperatures. There are obviously
Oh, you wouldn't, but I'm
infinite
saying
temperatures.
generally in society, there's considered to be a hot or a cold binary that one might say, but then there's lukewarm, and then there's
Room temperature.
room temperature, and so on and so forth, and that's all based on the temperature of our blood, and if we're a cold-blooded animal, what the definition of hot and cold may differ to that species, as something that's room temperature might be boiling hot for a cold-blooded animal. So it's just I just look at it like that. I don't think there's a binary that's strict. I think there's a binary there, loosely speaking, but if you want to say, well, all the gradients in the middle are unique things themselves, then yeah, okay, there's infinite genders. Just like there's infinite hot and colds based on which species you belong to.
So you do think there are infinite genders? I'm just trying to clarify here.
From the definition you gave, yes, there are. From the
Okay.
definition I
Can you
have
name three of
of-
them?
Can I name three of the genders?
Yeah.
Well, from my perspective, I don't hold to that concept. I don't believe there's infinite genders in the middle. I just think there's gradients between.
Sorry, I just asked you to clarify if you believe there are infinite genders. So final clarification: how many genders do you think there are?
So from my definition of the concept gender, there's two, and then there's a middle ground. From your conception of the binary gender track, there's infinite genders because you don't believe there's a middle ground, and each of the unique places is a gender of its own. So from your perspective, it's infinite. From my perspective, it's two binary with a middle ground.
No, I don't think there are infinite genders. I think there's.
Well then.
So do you
that's your
think that?
position.
Do you think
I'm
that
putting in my position.
that a male could have effeminate traits? I would say
Yes,
are there
100%.
more like very masculine? I'm talking to Mace here actually. I
Yeah,
think we're on the same
I
page,
think-
Jolly.
I think
But
you
do you
can-
think that like men
you
can
can
have
clear-
effeminate traits?
Yeah, you can clearly
Right.
have a masculine woman and a feminine
So
man.
so what do we
and a
call beta
female.
males then?
A man.
Are they
They're
the
still
same
male.
gender as but I think but they're slightly different, then I would guess those less effeminate men, right?
Just because you're more feminine doesn't make you a woman. That's not how it works.
Well, but you have some traits that
no, hold on
maybe
a second.
put
This
you
is a-
closer to
Interesting distinction.
like you're not like 100% male. Let's just use percentage values, right?
No.
Maybe you're like 96% male. You identify
No.
with male.
No, hold on a second.
Gender role
I need
traits
to-
in
I just
society.
I need to break in here. I think I had maybe an epiphany that helps me understand.
All right, I'll
Mace's
go ahead.
thinking.
Okay.
So you have the possibility for an effeminate male, which Mace doesn't disagree with, and you don't disagree with that either, right? Effeminate is a different.
Sorry,
category
no. I said
than male or female.
I said a feminine male.
Feminine, yeah. There's
Yeah,
a
it's the
possibility
same
for a feminine male, right? So feminine is a different category. It's on a different dimension than male versus female to Mace. So he doesn't deny that there can be a feminine male. He just doesn't think that impinges on the definition of male. So male is one dimension, x-axis. Feminine, masculine is a different dimension on
well,
like
someone-
a y-axis. So
Someone that has studied, I guess, sociology, like from what we were told, is that gender itself is is a social construct, not a biological construct. It's not. There's no like the penis doesn't have any innate traits that they embody in society. Depends on which society they live in. So, if we lived in a sort of medieval society, men wore makeup, wore high heels, did bunch of stuff that we would consider feminine, and that was innately male behavior for that time and that space of reality. So, if we strictly clarify that, if you're having a penis and you're wearing a makeup, then you're a feminine man. Well, the medieval Europeans would disagree. They'd go, no, that's a masculine. Masculine male trait. So, and we'd be like, no, that's bullshit. So, what the sociologists are contesting is that there's no behavior that I guess a man or a male and a female had that's that's outside of their societal context. So, if you look at the concept, that's why men or males are feeling like women trapped or females trapped in a man's body, is because they feel like the things they have in that desires for and in our society are considered feminine or female like. So they're basically saying, well, in that case I'm a female because the stuff I like or the things that I have innate desires for, psychological desires to do, in our society they're considered feminine or female behaviors. So even though I have a male's reproductive system, or man's reproductive system, I feel like I have feminine tendencies, whatever that may be, and rather than psychopathologize
or characteristics.
Yeah, and what psychology is trying to do is, rather than psychopathologize that and saying, well, you're gender dysphoric or you got some mental illness or whatever, like they used to with homosexuals back in the day, or other people like that. The DSM, I think, has a drive now to sort of get rid of that psychopathologizing of this behavior and saying, well, if it's socially constructed, then by our definition of gender dysphoric, we would have to label everyone in medieval Europe as gender dysphoric, which just is nonsensical. So we've got to identify this as a social construct and then say, well, based on this social construct, this person is a female stuck in a man's body. So it's rather than just saying, oh, well, you're crazy, it's better to say, well, yeah, maybe there is a spectrum, and maybe the spectrum is dependent on the society that you're in. And in a totally different society, you might be a male man, but in this society, you're a feminine female man because the stuff you like is female, or females tend to like based on socialization, on conditioning, and thus forth.
So, what were you guessing at, Doolittle?
So I'm guessing at that. It sounded like you acknowledged that there's such a thing as a feminine man.
Yes.
Right, like some men that have some feminine traits.
Yes, of course.
So your definition of gender is orthogonal to the definition of how feminine any given trait is.
Yeah, I mean, femininity and masculinity, to be honest, for the most part, bullshit terms anyway, because they're completely down to your subjective opinion of what's feminine.
Yeah, that's
and
what Snowy
masculine.
was just saying. Or that's
But
what
gender is not subjective. Gender is objective.
Wait. So what was subjective then?
Masculinity and femininity.
You mean gender subjective, sex is objective? That's what you mean?
No, gender is objective. Masculinity and femininity are subjective.
So aren't masculinity and femininity just verbs of?
No, so that's what we were talking about earlier, Zemo. Is that it seems that I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just to catch you up because you weren't here for the earlier part.
That'll work.
It seems like Mace is saying I've said before, it seems like Mace is making two claims that gender and sex are the same thing, and that there's two genders, which means it's the same thing to him as there's two sexes. And we're trying to figure out what exactly he means by that. And so sometimes it seems like he kind of sees the same thing as I do, where there's femininity and masculinity, which don't necessarily overlap with what I call sex, and he's still equating that with gender.
But then, I fail to see how
kind of
gender is
working-
objective. Then,
figuring out what that
if,
means.
if masculinity and femininity are the genders in action, it's basically like saying, you can act like a man. Like so, if masculinity itself, you're saying the concept of masculinity is subjective, then how can the thing that it's basically displaying be objective?
Because you can observe any animal in the world and you can objectively identify what gender it is. You can say, oh, that's a male lion, that's a female lion.
You're talking
But
Yeah.
sex,
you
right?
can't.
Yeah.
You can only subjectively
That's
say,
not
you know
true.
what, this lion seems very feminine. This lion seems very masculine. That's just your opinion. But whether it's a male lion or a female lion is always going to be objective.
No, so see in
So,
America and Australia, we call like male, like man and woman, and a male and female difference. So man and woman is the sex of that person, and the sex
It's still very confused, Jolly, in America.
is it?
90% of people haven't normalized their language to the other 10% of people that are making complete distinctions between man and woman and male and female.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was saying Australia, like the sex is seen as what you're talking about is objective. So that's what I was saying with a man's reproductive parts and a woman's reproductive parts. So your sex can be like a man or a woman, but male and female are separate. That's what you're calling subjective, masculine, feminine, understanding of what the person is. They're totally different things. Gender and sex are different things, at least here.
Yeah.
Like it's. Sorry, Zima, you go.
No, I agree with everything you just said. The differentiation between sex and gender gets conflated all the time in this. So sex, like you said, would be XX chromosome, XY chromosome, and then the spectrum would be the subjective implications you put onto that and that you may observe. So, yeah.
Yeah, so an example of the gender.
That's an important distinction.
Yeah,
I'm done.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just maybe I had a delay and I thought you were done. So an example
I am done.
an example of where there might be a spectrum, right? So you got a man and a woman, a mom and a dad, a male and a female. It's all quite objective. Who's who and who's got what parts and who plays most of the role of what in the family. And so the dad might be on a spectrum of how many hours a week do I stay home from work to take care of the kids? Right? So this is just one trait, it's just one behavior. If you are a dad who stays home 0 hours a day and to take care of the kids, you might be a traditional masculine father, right? Like the father's role
Well, if you
traditionally, right? But if what if
you're 0 hours? If you spend 0 hours, you'd just be a deadbeat dad, right? But
no, I mean, like you're providing
Mm-hmm.
for the family. You come home, you eat dinner, you watch Jeopardy, and you go to sleep, like my dad did.
Okay, so you're not interacting. Okay, I got
Right, and then when the kids are teenagers, then they start interacting with the kids a lot more, right?
Right.
Right.
I guess
so
the question would be
there's a spectrum, right? Like how many hours do you if you spend 20 hours, like you go to Europe and guys get 2 or 3 months of maternal leave when a baby's born, right? That's all very feminine of a rule. Like I think most places, most men don't spend that much time at home raising kids from the time a kid is 0 to 12. They're pretty much not involved. It's like 10% involved, right? But if you were a dad, and it's okay, it's totally okay that but if you spent 70 hours a week at home and 10 hours at work instead of 10 hours at home and 70 hours at work, then that's not the staying at home is not a masculine role. It's not manly. It's not. There's no machismo involved in
Why
that.
not?
And nobody's saying anything's wrong
Why
with that,
not?
but it's that's just what it is. To be
But
a man
why-
is
why-
to go outside the home and to gather the resources for the home.
But hold on. But why? What specifically about staying home to take care of your kids more than, say, dads in the 50s makes you less of a man or more?
No,
of a
I'm
woman,
not. Well, I'm
or
just
more-
saying there's a spectrum there on that behavior, and the spectrum goes from 0 to 120 hours a week.
Right. I
Right.
mean,
Right. So you might maybe you're 20% of the way
I don't know
on
if
one
that's
side or the other.
I don't know if that's a spectrum though. I just think that's a quantitative way to measure, hours spent places, right? So if your work, like for example, if the guy works at a yarn knitting factory, right?
Okay. Sure.
Is he more like, how does that work? 80 hours at a yarn knitting factory and 80 hours at a rock quarry.
80 hours on the loom.
Yeah, on the loom. Yes.
That would be super feminine. Yeah. 8 hours on loom is like, that's like spinster levels of femininity.
Yeah, but I guess the main point always comes back around to what makes you say that, right?
Well,
And
it's
you would
his
probably
opinion,
say
isn't it?
something about right, but it has to do with the conditioning of the past. So it's a reliance on like traditionalism. Well, traditionally men did this and we did that. Yeah,
That's
I mean,
what before you came, Zima. That's what I was saying. So in medieval, men used to wear makeup and high heels. Now all those men now all gender dysphoric, who've been psychopathologized, or is the concept of gender itself relative to the culture they're in? And sociologists and psychologists, I think, agree on this fact that it may actually just be a social construct rather than something innate or objective, like a biological set of reproductive organs, which are like, balls and dick or, vagina. I mean, that's subjective. That's what I think Mace was talking about, identifying lines in the jungle, like who pregnates which animal. That's the man, and that's the one getting impregnated is the woman. But, the gender stuff, which is, he seems to agree that is subjective, the masculinity, femininity is what most sociologists, gender theorists, or psychologists would call gender. So if there's, I can't really see the distinction between masculinity, femininity, and male and female. I think they're just like nouns in verb form. So it's kind of just like, I don't see.
nouns in verb form. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I will say, obviously, I don't know why the sex conversation has become so toxic over the past couple of years, but I mean, I will say that, I do think a lot of it, is social conditioning. I mean, we can't escape our social conditioning and blah, blah, blah. But there is like a slight biological underpinning for it, right? So like you can take toddlers and like more than likely the boys will play with the trucks and the girls will play with the dressers. Now, whether what you go on to extrapolate from that, trucks are male, dresses are female, is entirely, culturally based, etc. But there is that biological connection, and a lot of geneticists will tell you, biology, genes make up more of the story than we would like to admit, especially if you think you can, socially construct human nature. But yeah, beyond that, it's kind of fuzzy.
Loki V, do you have something you'd like to add to this?
Well, I just dropped in, so I'm only hearing fragments so far, and I'm multitasking.
Okay.
The
topic.
Come see what was up.
The topic is genders. How many genders do you think there are, Loki?
I think it would be an interesting Chinese curse for people who buy into the American Psychological Association's fraudulent attempts that they've backed away from under pressure to conflate gender with biological sex, to require a bathroom for every gender. there are an infinite number of unknowably dynamic genders, which is a mixture of personal identity and social constructs that cannot be clearly defined. And so any attempts to use the term in law is unavoidably what's known as void for vagueness. The American Psychological Association had the notion that sex was a hot button term for too many people, mainly nutcase shrinks, but they'd lay it off on patients. So by using gender instead of sex, by publication manual policy, which is extorted on journal authors and academics and in turn students, that somehow solve all of these neurotic shrink problems, or allegedly their patients, in ways that was basically a fraud. But, whenever you hear the word gender used for biological sex, generally that's a byproduct of a massive fraud by the American Nutcase Shrinks Association, where it would be interesting to hold them financially accountable for the misuse in politics, on news media. If you hear a news anchor talk about a gender bathroom bill, gender is used exactly 0 times in model building codes adopted in state laws on such things. Yeah, but you hear it in the news a lot because a lot of media figures are half-wits who've gone through bachelor's degrees with professors who have extorted it on them under an extension of APA 5th edition publication manual, since deprecated fraud. But
Okay,
beyond that, gender is a personal issue plus a social issue, so it's rather complicated for the honest meanings.
So to summarize, you think there are infinite genders?
Yes, and they're and unknowably complicated because of the nature of it to be a mix of personal identity and social role constructs.
Okay, just to make sure we're talking the same language, are male and female genders?
No.
Okay, we're talking completely different languages then.
Their biological sexes, masculine and feminine, are genders which don't exist in modern English. They existed in Old English, they exist in French, Latin, some other languages. You can have gendered connectors in electronics or in auto parts.
Okay.
Which is a different meaning of gender.
What do you call male and female if not genders?
It depends. If I mean biological sexes, I call them biological sexes.
Okay. How many biological sexes are there?
They're masculine and feminine genders.
How many biological sexes are there?
Well, biological sex is sort of a human scientific ontology, mostly, where it's primarily the XY chromosome determinism, except that there are some complicating factors than that, where if you look in more detail, it's not quite that simple, except for the most part, it usually is, except that there are exceptions. And,
so how many are there?
There's 4 trigene combinations, 3 of which usually die so young they're not socially significant. And the one that tends to not die off young tends to end up a bit of a mess, trying to sort out how they function in life.
So how many are there?
Well, genders we've already answered.
How many biological sexes are there? Because that's what I mean when I say gender.
Well, then I would say that you're wrong, and that it's.
Well, let's not get tied up in semantics. I'm using your language now for sake of argument. How many biological genders? I mean, sexes are there?
This is an important point that came up.
There are 2 primarily, except
it's not important. I'm using your language for sake of argument. How many biological sexes are there?
As I've just answered, primarily 2, except that there are some oddball cases that complicate it. And assuming we're talking humans and most mammals,
just give me a straight up number. Is it 2?
It's
2
5.
primarily,
Six.
Except that there are some complicating exceptions.
It's 6. It's 6.
So is the answer
there's 6 different. There's 6 different biological sexes.
Well, genetic combinations, but
Well, there's XY, right? XX, YY, XXY,
No.
XXX, and YYY.
Your gender is actually determined by the very last chromosome. If it's a Y, you're a
There's
male.
only-
If it's an X, you're a female. That's it. Simple as
except
that.
if you use an honest definition of gender, and that's something I'm very picky
Sorry,
about.
yeah.
Biological
In
factors
my
are not the
language,
same.
in my language,
Tyler,
just
what kind of-
hold on. When I say gender, just translate that to whatever you think, whatever word you use in your head, so we can.
What
Because
kind of
when
school systems were you
I'm
defrauded by?
automatically going to say gender all the time. I'm not trying to be annoying. That's just my language. I can't. It's
No,
really
but
hard
what-
for me to filter it for you. So you're just going to have to translate it
What
yourself.
fraud-driven school system indoctrinated that in you?
Sorry.
What fraud-driven school system indoctrinated that in you?
That's just the English language.
No, look, this is an
no.
important point, Mace. It is
No, it's not. You need to
just
study the
language.
English
It's a
language.
misunderstanding of terms.
I read the dictionary when I was little. That's the definition that I
Try getting
learned
the American
growing up.
Psychological Association publication manuals 4 or earlier and 5 and 6.
Yeah, I'm not from America, so it may be that perhaps the American dictionary was different to
and
the
Associated Press for news.
Loki.
you'll
It
see
may
that-
be. It is entirely possible that the American dictionary was different to the English dictionaries at the time I was growing up, and at the time I was learning the English language. So using any
Right,
kind
so
of
sex
American
and gender
sources is
being
irrelevant to me.
About being very similar terms, right? Why do we have different words for them if they mean exactly the same thing?
Well, it's like saying sex and intercourse mean the same thing. There are loads of synonyms in the English language, and some synonyms hold different social implications with them. For example, I'm more likely to. I usually prefer to say gender to sex in a conversation because sex obviously has it also refers to something else which is unrelated and is somewhat taboo, and I don't really want that to be on people's mind, especially if I was to write a form. If I was to write a form out and I say what sex, well, actually no, not if it says. So let's just say name, sex, right? Someone will put their name, and then under sex they'll just put yes please, and that's not helpful. I want to know if they're male or female. So instead of putting sex, I'll put gender, and then they have to put male or female. They can't put yes please. So synonyms exist, and some synonyms have different issues associated with them.
Well, it's a big issue when you have what, according to you, are synonyms that would otherwise mean the exact same thing, at least in how you're using them, when they apparently, to a lot of people, do not mean the same thing.
I'm pretty sure
it seems like there's a fairly
to like
logical
99% of
that they
people,
don't mean-
to 99% of people, gender and sex are synonyms.
Yeah, well, that would be a misconception if they interpret that as meaning they are identical in meaning.
Sorry, I'm confused. What are you getting at there?
If they think they mean the exact same thing, then that is simply a misconception.
No, they do mean the same thing.
And yet they don't.
Can you guys hear me?
Hello.
Hey, I
Travis?
actually think it's an interesting line to go down. Like, does everyone think that people use these terms the way you are currently saying you use them? Do you think that the colloquial usages are in line with the descriptions or the way you are describing these terms?
Are you asking me?
Well, I think it's just a good question for the room because there's been a lot of complicated answers to this. And do they, and does everyone think that, they have the right colloquial usage, or are they fighting to have these terms changed to what they think is correct?
I'm pretty much certain that people who try to separate gender and sex are really just campaigning to separate them. because they're not separate really. If you're on safari and you ask your tour guide what gender is that monkey over there, they're not going to say, oh, it's pansexual. They're going to say it's male or
Mace,
female.
I'm asking something different. Do you believe that you are using this colloquially? Do you think most people just either will say sex or gender and they use it interchangeably?
Yeah, I think if I put name and gender on a form, 99.99% of people are going to answer gender with male or female.
And then you would think that other people who think otherwise about this are campaigning for an update, or what they think would be an upgrade.
Yeah, they're trying to change the English language, and I'm not really sure why.
Because they believe that ideas can be separate from some form of physical reality, I suppose. And they feel
Andy, it's a good question for you too. Like, do you think you are the way you understand gender, like that's how people generally use it, or do you think you're campaigning for an upgrade?
I don't think I'm campaigning for anything, considering I'm not able to fully describe what I mean about this, unfortunately. But I would say people are starting to make a somewhat of a distinction, although not always. And it's kind of irrelevant to what the truth is, what the majority of people think.
Well, actually, common usage is what's relevant with regards to language, right? Words do not have intrinsic meaning; they have usages. So this is how language is formed.
Well, if the original usage then of the word gender was not identical to sex, then that would be a fact of how it was used, right?
But the original usage of them is that they were synonyms. They were the same thing.
Yeah, synonyms and identical in concept and usage are not the same. They're related ideas, but I don't think that means they're identical.
Okay, let me rephrase. Gender and sex were originally used as the exact same thing. They were never separate things in history. It's only a very recent change that's been made in some academic circles.
Well, according to OED, you're wrong about that. But and Travis is sloppy in that there are also terms that have professional meanings in sociology and law, where having precise, clear meanings, can adversely affect large numbers of people, through coercion and extortion.
That's not words having intrinsic meaning, though.
It's a requirement to have specific, common, knowable meaning.
But that's not that. What you've just said is not antithetical to what I said.
But according to OED etymology, the word gender has been used since the 14th century as a grammatical term referring to classes of noun designated as masculine, feminine, neuter in some languages. The sense denoting biological sex has been used since the 14th century, but did not become common until mid-20th century. Although the words gender and sex are often used interchangeably, they have different connotations, sex referring to biological differences, while gender more often refers to cultural and social differences, and sometimes encompasses a broader range of identities than the binary of male and female. And, if you go to, the sociology definitions, and, one of my ex-girlfriends has several grad degrees in social psych and used to teach, gender identity and sexuality courses to grad students. She'd rattle off, a precise sociology definition, which is very much focused on the identities, and of course noting they're talking about masculine, feminine, the same as you would in electrical connectors or boats or objects in gendered languages, male and female being the sex terms, masculine, feminine being genders. And of course, then there's a lot more on the development. But and that time frame also parallels. I have a friend who's deceased now, who was a Finnish-born, Paris-educated psychologist who was associated with Johns Hopkins for years, and she was part of the APA movement to try to change the use of sex for biological sex to gender terms, for the reasons I stated before. And, it's probably that would go back to when I was a kid, before most here were born. So you might think of it as going on forever relative to your lifetime, but it's an incredibly recent and modern perversion of language that was pushed by extortion through academia and publishing empires, by a certain activist faction in the American Psychological Association. So if you don't understand that, you've been tricked and are, carrying on a fraud unwittingly as opposed to intentionally the way they did.
Not sure who taught you that, but your history is completely wrong, I'm afraid. It's actually the other way
I would say
around.
the same thing,
It
and I've
doesn't
got a
even
lot
seem
more
like
facts.
you heard of what he was talking about. How do you know that for certain?
Sorry.
Well, let's hear Mace's. I'd like to hear Mace. Why do you think what Loki just said is wrong?
Well, I may have misunderstood him, but it sounds like what Loki's saying is originally the word gender and sex, the words gender and sex meant separate things, and then only recently people have been campaigning to merge them together. But in fact, it's the other way around. Originally, they were always the same thing, and only recently people have been campaigning to separate them.
Okay.
Well,
What
I
is
think
the evidence for that claim?
we should use it. Yeah. At this point, let's use the off-air text. Mace, you should post something. Whenever we get into disagreements about historical facts, let's get into posting our resources so that we can sort out the disagreement on the air.
I can
Whatever
post
the
something.
words are
I
originally
can copy
used to
something
be.
out of OED, but I can't post the entire publication manuals, editions 3, 4, 5, and 6 of APA. Those are readily available, but it's not something you can even read through in a matter of a couple of hours. I'd suggest the Associated Press style guide, which is actually more mature than the APA's. They have some interesting handling of trying to discourage using, terms for sex and gender and just using people's names when practical, just because of the amount of mess APA has made. And there are a number of other, style guides for publishing and academic writing as well, that, can take a lot of time to review and cross-compare.
I think whatever these words originally mean or what they originally use, I think how they are starting to be used to describe something that is genuinely going on in reality, in a very helpful way. I think, like, they define it better than perhaps they would have been, and that doesn't bother me too much.
I may have misunderstood it, but I heard in passing Mace, I think it was Mace, make a pretty interesting point, that by and large, gender and sex have been used somewhat synonymously, maybe not exactly interchangeably, but there's really not much to write home about as far as the differences historically. I'm sure there were a few enlightened maybe places. But anyways, the main point is that because of women having roles where they can sort of break off and become, they could have their own house and they don't have to rely on a man. They're trying to. It seems it's a very natural process of trying to break down these rigid, feminine, masculine roles when they're saying, "Hey, this does not apply to us. We don't care to think of ourselves in this, constraining way. We're out there doing quote unquote masculine things, and it seems like a very natural process. Now, I would grant, along with anybody, that one big trouble about this is that the academia around this has gotten totally silly and in some places just like a cartel of nonsense, right? But there is just there is an interesting part to that. I think that's a good point. And it's a rather natural, like I said, sort of process, right? I mean, the language, you want the language to reflect the world, and if the world's changing, and if men and women are having different roles, it's a totally natural thing to want to maybe change the language to sort that out. And then you have the monster of I don't mean it in that way, but of transgenderism and that whole. How do we make sense of this with language, with our language game? Well,
transgenderism or gender dysphoria is when you think that you were born in the wrong body, isn't it? Is when, let's say, you believe that you are a female brain trapped in a male body, for example.
Your subjective experience does not seem to match your outer biological reality.
For example, someone with gender dysphoria might say that they have a female brain, but it's trapped in a male body.
Yeah, they might say that. I mean, if they mean it literally, I don't think there's any science to a female and male brain. But I mean, in euphemistic terms, sure.
But it seems like that goes by my definition of gender, because in order for that to make sense to some of you in the chat, it would have to be called transsexualism and sexual dysphoria.
Well, I guess this is the fundamental issue with how we talk about this, because at least by my understanding of the word, you're not using the word gender correctly. You're using gender when you should be using sex.
So when I say transgender and gender dysphoria, you think I'm using the word gender incorrectly, even though that word has been
when you
around.
say gender and you're talking about biological things like a penis and a vagina, that I would say you should be using sex, but you're using gender to describe that.
Transgenderism is referring to biological things.
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I don't think it is actually. I think it's referring to your like I said, it's a mismatch between your subjective experience of yourself and the objective sexual, body you have, etc. Right? So
yes, the objective part is gender. The objective part
right, but gender is the subjective meanings that we attach onto sex, biological sex, XX and XY chromosomes, right? So in that sense, it makes perfect sense.
And dysphoria is your emotional reactions to the mismatch of identity and roles. It's not the reality of whatever you are.
So just to confirm, should gender dysphoria be changed to sexual dysphoria? Would that make more sense to you?
No, because the sexual is a physical reality. It's not the personal image or a social
I think I see some cognitive dissonance there. Then there seems to be a bit of an inconsistency in your argument then, because. But in your language, a transgender person is actually transsexual, not transgender.
Okay. Honestly, this is just
semantics.
This is just semantics at this point.
Yeah, this is exactly why I didn't want to get stuck down the semantic route. I think
honestly,
going forward for this to work,
there's a disagreement on terms that make it difficult to communicate.
I don't agree. I think you as the minority can just translate my English language into your whatever language you're using, and then
whether I'm in the minority or not, I don't think it's correct to use the word gender the way you're using it.
Okay, that's fine, but you know what I mean when I say gender, so why can't you just translate it in your head?
We can't. We don't. We
Because
don't really though.
because you're saying something that I don't think is factually correct.
If
Okay,
you don't
just
look,
translate it in
Mace,
your head.
if you can't hold on, really.
It's important
If you
to your
can't at
point.
least if you can't at least acknowledge that sex refers to biological, unarguable XY, XX chromosome, and gender in 2021. I'm not talking about in the 1400s or anything. In 2021, gender refers to the subjective feelings and actions that we subscribe
Feelings?
to
No,
male
no, no.
and female.
Gender has nothing to do with feelings. There are two genders, male and female.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, hold on. Yes, it does. Because if I look at Arnold Schwarzenegger and I associate that with a tough persona, a badass that can lift me off the ground and throw me, and then I say, "Oh, is that masculine or feminine?" That's feminine.
Masculinity and femininity are not genders, though.
Yeah, they are.
No.
Masculine and feminine, yes. Okay. Well, we just Mace. We fundamentally disagree about what the words mean.
Why it seems like we do have to talk about semantics, even though you want to get away from it, is because it seems like only two genders.
I am trying so hard to get away from the semantics because it's just not productive at all in this case.
No, but it's
not
important
productive
to your point. Because your point seems to be
I didn't want to have an argument
because there are two sexes.
I didn't want this debate to just be about language. I wanted it to be about sexual dimorphism. I wanted to talk about the actual biological differences between men and women and whatever other genders you believe there are. I didn't want it to be about the different English languages that we're using, because that's boring. It's overused.
Where and how did you they're obviously connected because the way that you're interpreting those words have to do with what you think about this.
Not really, because even if I use your words for sake of argument, even if we just say how many, what was it again, sexual thingies there are, what words do you use?
Well, it does because you said you want to talk about sexual dimorphism.
If for sake of argument,
gender and
sex, if for sake of argument,
which I don't agree with that premise.
If for sake of argument, I say how many biological sexes are there? I still think there's two. It doesn't matter.
I agree with that. You said I agree with that.
Okay.
I mean, save like making like hermaphrodite or a category or something.
Your reason why there are two
hermaphrodite's not a gender in my opinion, but I'm happy to debate that with you.
Your reason why there are two genders, is that not because there are two sexes?
Sorry, see, that's the thing about language. When I say gender, you need to translate that in your head to biological sex, because I'm automatically, when I'm not thinking about it, I just say gender. I don't say biological sex. That's so weird to me.
I can. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's grant you that is the correct usage. What word do you use to describe the characteristics that we would describe to someone, say like the hottest supermodel, you know, Megan Fox and The Rock? And we know there's differences. There's tangible differences, how they look, but their personalities and their characteristics, etc. I don't think I need to elaborate on this. I kind of know what I'm speaking of. What do you refer to that as?
One's male and one's female. Is that what you're talking about?
No. The subject, like I said, that not the biological sex, the subjective experience and ideas and concepts that you link to biological sex.
Well, I mean, there's loads of subjective differences between them, and not all those differences have anything to do with gender, so I'm not really sure what you're talking about there.
Bullshit, they don't have anything to do with gender.
Yeah, personality doesn't have anything to do with gender, does it? They have different personalities, don't they?
Okay, that's not true, okay?
They do have the same personality. Let's look this up, shall we?
No, okay. If you take a sample of the one, okay, hold on, that's not true. If you take a sample of the 100 most violent, aggressive, disagreeable people, which is a big 5 personality trait, right? Or it's one of the subsets. Like 99 out of 100 will be men. Okay, that is a distinct personality trait difference. If you look at something like
I didn't say personality traits. I said personality types. Megan Fox and The Rock have different personality types.
Now this is getting annoying because you're moving the goalposts every time.
I said
every
types.
Time I give you
if I said trait, that was a mistake. But I'm pretty sure I said types.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Let's not get all freaked out if we have disagreements on words.
No, it's fine. It's just annoying.
But I think that last point, was, right to differentiate, because there was a question of whether you were talking about types or traits. But no, this is good. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I misheard that. I'm sorry.
Well, anyway, can we move away from the semantics now? Because it's been like 2 or 3 hours of this, and I want to get back onto what the debate was supposed to be.
I gotta ask you though, Mace. Do you think that this is more than about semantics to the people who disagree with you?
I think there is a legitimate and very interesting semantic debate. That's just not what I wanted this session to be about.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, you might. I think it's inevitable you're going to stumble back on it, but yeah, I mean, carry on. Whatever the next topic is.
By the way, I just managed to get the short form OED listing for the primary gender into the off-air text. There's difficulties with Discord reacting and barfing on some of the special characters they use. So it took a little effort to strip some of those and get it to display and not cut off.
So anyway,
that would be interesting to hear.
Does anyone think there are more than 2 biological sexes?
Not that are currently known among the human race, no.
Oh, well, no. Yeah, so, sorry, I'm talking about just in the human race. We do know
there's frogs, right?
There are 3 biological sexes on Earth that we know of, but only 2 human ones.
Right, so if you look at the sex as a function of your DNA, right? You have the chromosomes that people talk about, X chromosomes and Y chromosomes.
Yeah, your very last chromosome determines your biological sex.
Right, so the alternate way to define that would be also the people that have 3 chromosomes, right? There's 4 different kinds of
people that have an extra chromosome still have a last chromosome, and that last one will be the one that determines their biological sex. All the rest do other things.
Is that a matter of physics?
It's a matter of biology. The very end chromosome of the, I don't know what you call it, but you've got like a certain number of them. I can't remember how many it was, but the very last one, that's responsible for gender. All the rest do completely different things, and they're not relevant.
Okay, I mean that's the claim. I haven't, it's new to me, but okay. But so almost everybody's either XX or XY, right?
Yeah, some people might end with XXY. That's okay, but it's the Y that matters. The Y makes them male. It's the very last
they're
chromosome.
Kind of next to each other. It's not
That's
like one
what makes us philosophers. It's the why that matters.
Right. So
Andy's back.
It's not entirely clear, in terms of outcomes to me that it makes that it's that clear cut. So people that are XXY or people that are YYX.
No,
they don't have all the same physical characteristics.
You wouldn't have YYX. I don't think you'd have YYX. That doesn't exist, does it?
XYY or YYX or
the Y would be the very last chromosome. If you have a Y chromosome, it would always be the last one. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
That doesn't make any sense to me. Well, the normal sex chromosomes, you got an XX and an XY, and all the other ones are exceptions. But
No,
as far
I
as
just
I
looked it
know,
up. So
they
you
all
can
have
have
different-
two Y chromosomes, but they'll always be the last two. The Y chromosome, you can't possibly have an X chromosome as your final chromosome if you also have a Y chromosome. The Y always has to be
You
the
can't have
last one.
There's no XXX.
Yeah, there is XXX, but there is no YX.
That's just because they don't want to have to say an XY and a YX as being different.
No, the order matters. The Y always comes last.
Is that because the chromosomes themselves, like there's a pair of chromosomes that twist clockwise, and maybe one of the other ones twists in a different way?
No, the reasoning is
YXX?
that the order of the chromosomes matters, and if you change the order, then you change the animal that you end up with. Because you're altering the genetic.
I thought we're just talking about the way that the letters are arranged in a description.
Well, they're arranged in order, aren't they?
No.
No, really.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen an electron microscope image of a nucleus, of a cell nucleus?
Yeah.
To see the DNA. Do you see any order there? It's not a particularly orderly system. So if somebody goes in and says, "Well, I have an XYY and an XYX and a YXX," or no, the YXX doesn't happen. These things are, each one of these is independently, randomly oriented around the nucleus. And every single cell is entirely different than the one next to it in terms of what order those DNA strands go in.
So the chromosomes aren't connected
because
to them.
it's just chaos. The arrangement, the physical arrangement of the chromosomes is just chaos. They're not physically end to end.
Oh, okay. No, you know what? I just looked it up. It looks like you're probably right there, actually. Okay, so the order doesn't matter. If they have a Y, they're still going to be they're still going to be male.
Amongst XX and XY, all of the XYs will be male.
If they have any Ys at all, they're male.
All XY. I'm gonna stop there. All XYs are male, and all XXs are female.
Right.
That represents well over 90% of people. Those two categories.
And if you have an XYY, that's also male, or an XXY, that's also
male. You're being dishonest again. It's an other category.
I assure you, I'm not being dishonest. I may be wrong, but not dishonest.
Yeah. So something like 1% of people or less, it's in that order of magnitude, have 3 chromosomes, which means that they're in terms of the sex chromosomes. So normal people are XX or XY, and people that don't have haploid sex chromosomes are called diploid, and they have XXY or XYX or XYY or XXX or YYY. I don't know what the combinations of 2 or 3 X's and Y's. Like there's people that just have 3 sex chromosomes. So what do you call that? Like, is it a man or a woman? I don't know. We call that.
It depends if they have a Y chromosome. If they have a Y chromosome, even one, then they're a man. Simple as that.
I mean, that's one way of talking about it. But some of these people, they don't manifest their physicality through their life just in terms of what their last chromosome is.
What's your point?
They could be like there's people that are born with female organs and they have Y chromosomes that just don't.
Does that make them a third gender?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, what's that gender called?
I don't think we have a name for it yet.
What's
Native
the
American.
I
purpose
think
of
it makes
this?
him a different Sorry, I think it makes him a different sex, not a different gender.
Sorry, yeah, see, I did it again. I meant biological sex. Does that make them a third biological sex?
Yeah, I think so. I think it does. I think there are 6 biological sexes, and about 99% of there's about 6, and X. It's all the combinations of X's and Y's in 3 chromosomes, 2 or 3 chromosomes.
We don't really have language for it, but I'd be willing to settle for the trigened as being a third other sex group and lump all 4 genetic combinations together.
And they're infrequent enough that they're less than the normal 2 anyway.
So can you show me?
What I hate about this topic, it seems like neither side is entirely correct.
Hold on, Andy. Doolittle, can you send me a picture of someone who has a Y chromosome but isn't a man?
Actually,
they don't even have to.
That's actually kind of easy. Hold on a second.
They don't even have to be. They don't even have to be human. Actually, can you send me any animal
what's
at all?
Bruce Jenner's new name?
No, not a transgender person. I mean,
what's Bruce Jenner's? Wait.
Can you send me an image of any animal which has a Y chromosome and isn't biologically male?
I'm in trouble now. I just searched for Bruce Jenner.
Of the few people I've known who are trigened well enough to have serious discussions about their issues with them, I would say that they've been psychological messes struggling with life, and that's dominated a lot else in there for them.
My files are too powerful.
You do little. You don't need to send me a picture of a transgender person.
Never had that level of discussions with anyone trigened.
Hold on, Loki. If you send me a picture of a transgender person, you're just obviously trying to misinterpret what I asked you.
Wait. Now you're saying transgender now, but there's a difference between that and trigened.
He's going to send me a picture of Bruce Jenner.
Bruce Jenner. No, it's on live text. A person
with
an X chromosome who's not a man.
That's just
that's not the question I asked you though, Doolittle. I asked you.
That's what you just said.
No, I asked.
Send me a picture. I'm an engineer. I don't forget these things.
Send
me a picture of an person with an X chromosome who's not a man.
All right. Look, forget it. I'm gonna clarify my question to you now, okay? And please don't try to intentionally misunderstand me.
Gender identity disorder.
Loki, shush, I'm asking an important question here. Okay.
You can have.
Can a moderator please mute Loki?
A legal sex and a sexual identity that.
Okay, you're muted for the stream. Doolittle. My question is, can you send me a picture of any animal at all which has a Y chromosome but is not biologically male?
Oh, okay. I'll see if I can find one.
If he was unable to do that, does that prove that doesn't exist?
No, it doesn't help his argument.
It doesn't help if you can't find an example of what you're saying is a thing.
That's true. I just think that
I'm trying to just.
Hey Mace, make sure the people online on YouTube can see the pictures, right? If you're looking at them, maybe you can share your screen. I don't know if you can, but
yeah,
it's okay
he can see. There's a picture of Bruce Jenner, but it's not relevant to the question I was asking.
By the way, I pulled the OED on set and posted that too.
But there's not a lot of pictures of people here. They keep showing me pictures of chromosomes.
APA 4th, I only have only paper form. 5th and 6th in electronic. So AP style guide electronic form. But the coverage of gender, sex, and names and references in those is way too lengthy and complicated to just do simple copy and posts. You got to go read books like that on your own time.
Maybe it's just that picture, but I think if you told me that was a biological...
Okay. So, here's the picture. Here's a picture of a human being who is an XXY chromosome person.
Okay, that's clearly male. So that proves my points.
Okay, so I was going to ask Mace.
Whatever you say, dude.
Yeah, but Mace. Okay, so I
You
was
can
going to
see
ask this.
that's
So what?
male.
But
Okay,
hold
so
on.
here's the clinical description. Klinefelter syndrome 47 XXY or XXY syndrome is a condition in which human males have an extra chromosome.
Human males, there you go.
Males,
Thank you. I
listen
rest
to
my
the whole
case.
thing. Listen to the
Doesn't
whole
matter.
God,
You just called him a male.
Listen to the whole. Listen to the whole thing.
Do I
Or
need to? You just called him a
females
male.
have an XX chromosome makeup. So you got XXY males and YYX females. That all have
Sorry, say that again.
syndrome. So YYX, I don't know, YYX females, XXY females.
Well, you said you
And
ordered
it's
it,
also been
matter.
historically common for doctors
So, I
at
don't know, to
birth
me, I don't think
to
it matters.
assign a
They
sex to
just
try genes
X's
and for
Y.
them to
Loki,
find
please-
out that they really
Please stop
fit
interrupting, dude.
either
Oh no, I haven't muted,
convention.
so I can't even tell if he's trying to talk. But I thought you asked someone. I just muted him for myself.
Why are y'all
Anyway,
muting
point is-
Loki, dude?
Because he
What are y'all
keeps
doing?
interrupting.
No, he asked. It's
No. He can't
It's
interject
Mace's
every
show.
once in a while.
It's Mace's show, and
He
Mace
seems
said,
to have a
if
lot
Mace
of
said,
points
please
about
mute.
it.
If Mace said please mute Loki, then that's
Well, sorry, I should have said you can unmute him now. He's quiet.
yeah, okay. I think he is on mute. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, he's on mute.
He never was on mute, dude.
Yeah, he was just me, just personally for me. He was muted. I thought I muted him for the server. So
wish I could
Klinefelter
do that.
syndrome is basically where you get the 3 chromosomes, and that's a picture of one of the male ones.
Okay, can you send me a picture of a female one?
I don't know.
But I was gonna ask this, May. So, like, say he pulls up a picture. So, what was your exact question? Your challenge to him?
Can he send me a picture of any animal which has a Y chromosome and is not biologically male?
So, if he showed you a picture of exactly what you're asking for, how would you identify it as being a male once you know it has that chromosome? What other criteria would you use to look at it to identify it as what you're trying to look for?
Well, I suppose. I mean, I'm not entirely sure how.
Yeah,
but
I don't think you are. I think that's why we're relying upon
Let me
the
finish my
chromosomes, right?
sentence. I was going to say, not entirely sure how I'm able to do it, but when I look at a human, at least, with other animals it's different, but when I look at a human, I can just tell if it's male or female, because humans are sexually dimorphic enough that my brain is just programmed to recognise male and females. With other animals it can vary, but I mean, if it's a lion I can easily tell the difference. If it's an ant or a bee, again I can fairly easily tell the difference. That with spiders it can be a
But
bit
how
difficult.
does your recognition of how you recognize it overturn the biology of it? Like, if you just say, "Oh, that just looks like a girl to me," I can just tell, and then we say, "Well, it has this chromosome." Like, what does this even prove?
Well,
Is my
I
point.
believe I'm a reasonable person and I'm fairly good at it, but if you don't agree with me, you can look at that picture that he's posted and you can see for yourself it is clearly male.
But again, I'm not talking about that. I'm asking, what does this even prove?
Well, if we get
I'm confused.
when we get to that issue, we can discuss it, but right now, do you agree with me that that's clearly a male?
I don't know. Where's the picture?
It's in live text.
I mean, if it looks, assuming I look at the picture and think it looks like a male, I would say it looks like a male, and the chromosomal profile is how it is, so it's like 50 one way, 50 the other. Right?
No, it looks like a male and it has a Y chromosome, which proves my point that only males have Y chromosomes.
Where's that live text? said that's clearly a male.
I don't.
Dude,
I don't know.
that's up for debate, dude.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. That person looks very neotenic.
So
Which is a
if you saw that guy in the street, you wouldn't just instantly know they were male.
No, to me that looks like somebody who could be male or female. It's
Again,
to me at
the
least.
top-
I find that very
to me that
okay.
person,
You know what? I'll take
ambiguous.
Andy. I'll take your word for it. I mean I can't prove you wrong on that, but I am surprised because for me it just looks very male.
Well, because when I look at this person, to me they look a lot like a baby, right?
Yeah, it looks like a male child to me.
For me, it looks too young for me to tell. You know.
I just wanted to say, like, I've been listening to this conversation. I haven't been as sucked into a conversation so much like I am with this one right now. I had to jump on. I think you're doing a good job, Mace, for your first crack at this.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say, I think the frustration in the room is why this is such a hot topic for people, and why it's always a very popular discussion topic. I was just thinking about that as I was listening, as you all, stumbled through this really, tough topic.
In here,
I know that I'm seething with rage.
Turn on your camera, Andy. Let's go.
Kind of. Anytime I talk to Mace, I get angry.
What are you guys talking about? I only got the last bit of that.
We were talking about how cute you are, and Mace doesn't think you're all that cute, and I'm saying, look, he's not that bad, and Travis thinks you're gorgeous.
I thought it was an argument over visual versus anal rimming determination of sexing other people without their consent to, and whether that should be considered.
God damn me, you guys are hard to squeeze out.
So I also wanted to know, like, what other angles, Mace, you had to go to, that are kind of within this spectrum where you can escape semantics, because I was interested to see you try to do that. And I
eventually had to resort to using their language as much as possible and forcing myself to say biological sex instead of gender, which I think you may have noticed I found difficult.
Mace from Planet Mace has been forced to speak the lesser human language.
Merriam and Webster send their regards.
Merriam and Webster is American, so I don't care what they say.
Yes, where I posted both gender and sex from OED, which has an American editor at large, but it's from this place called Oxford. You may have heard of.
No, you don't care what Americans think, do you, Mace?
When it comes to the English language, when it comes to the English language, I don't think Americans are the authority on that.
When it comes to the English, because you're prim and proper, aren't you? On the other side of the pond. That's
to be honest, I class the American English and English as two separate languages.
Listen to me, dude.
You know what, dude?
Red-toed bastard.
You know what, dude? No matter what you say, we're gonna make up new fucking slang words over in America, and they're gonna be in your fucking dictionaries in 3 or 4 fucking years. Just like now, there's probably some slang shit you didn't want in it back at 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, it's very annoying.
What other two languages? What other two distinct languages?
The most rapidly rising word in OED is
your continued existence.
All I heard was your continued existence.
What was Loki saying?
Yeah, go ahead, Loki.
You know what the most increased usage word in OED is between the second edition, fourth revision, and the third edition, which is now online only since it's grown so much?
I think you're the only person in this entire earth who knows that answer.
Do a text search of the entire OED for the word fuck, and you'll see that.
Croc? That's funny.
Yes, that's grown by about 1,000% prevalence in OED.
What has crotch?
No, croc.
No, fuck.
Oh, fuck. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Fucking stupid.
It is fucking fuck.
Well, anyway, do little.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted shit. I'm getting out of here.
That's okay.
And by the way, in that
do little. Were you able to find
variants as definitions, etymology, and use in other definitions, as well as examples? Because of course, OED has like 4 major sections of what it lists, not just 1 or 2 like some dictionaries.
I don't know what OED is. Doolittle, were you able to find an example of any animal that met my criteria?
How are you not going to know what OED stands for?
Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. I've not found any more examples. I don't think the scientists that they're probably not differentiating between XXY and YXX or XYX or XXY.
Okay, fair enough.
So you see what I'm saying? There's permutations, and they're not saying, well, like the Y is last, and these all kind of look like males.
Yeah, we established that you were right. The order of the chromosomes didn't matter, but
I'm not sure that I'm not sure that anyone's established that, but I'm just not seeing any indication that people have tried to make that attempt.
No. You said earlier that the order of the chromosomes.
I don't think they do.
Matter.
I don't think they do matter.
Well, I agree with you. After having a look myself, I think you're right that the order doesn't matter, but the type of chromosome still does. If they have
probably does. Yeah.
If they have a Y chromosome at all, then they're male.
I've found people with Y chromosomes who are not men, such as the woman formerly known as Bruce Jenner.
No,
and that's a Y chromosome that's not a man.
Yeah, but they're still male. They may not identify.
I've also found people with 2 X chromosomes who are not a woman.
You misunderstand me. Let's forget about whether they present themselves as a man or a woman is irrelevant. They're still male or female.
Right, but what I'm saying is that I've found 2 things. I've found people with Y chromosomes that are not men. I found people with 2 X chromosomes who are not women.
That wasn't my question, though.
But I
asked you
with all 3.
I asked you if you could find.
Tell which one they are.
I asked you if you could find. I asked you if you could find anyone with a Y chromosome who was not biologically male.
Right, like I said, like the 3 Ys don't really live. They don't really live to be able to look at them and say, "Oh yeah, they're male or they're not female." They don't make it. The 3 Ys don't. They don't really make it.
This is a total Mott and Bailey. This is a total Mott and Bailey. It's okay. Can you give me this with the right chromosomes? And then he shows you, and then you say, okay, well it doesn't. Like I asked you, which you didn't answer. Once you already know the chromosomes, what other metric are you using to say, okay, well that's a man or that's a woman? And you gave me some subjective answer, which is not scientific and it's not satisfactory in my opinion. So
well, the purpose of this show is to convince me and the audience otherwise.
Yeah, as frustrating as it may be to try and fucking convince Mace of anything, that's like the idea behind this show.
But so also, I mean,
to show you that I'm merely trying to show you that the evidence that you're requiring is absurd. Like when you break it down, like what you're asking for.
Maybe, but even if I'm personally beyond convincing on this, there are people in the audience who could be convinced, and I'm pretty sure most people in the audience, if they're reasonable, will look at this picture and they will see an obviously male child-looking person. They would not see. No reasonable person would look at this guy and think he looks female.
Hold on, no. Again, I ask
Can you
what
please stop
metric are you
interrupting me?
using?
It's so annoying. If I had
I'm not-
administrative privileges, I would have muted you permanently because you just
Hang
keep
on.
interrupting.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Mace. You've been talking the whole fucking time, and you don't answer anybody's questions. Now, again, I ask you,
I try
what
my
are you
best.
using? What are you using to try to determine if that's a male or female beyond the chromosomal profile? You don't have an answer. It's a subjective fucking measurement.
Yeah, I just look at them and I can just tell.
All right.
Again, a subjective measurement.
I just collected and posted something else in off-air text, a link to a sociology definition on gender from a sociology dictionary and a snippet of the primary definition. But you really have to go to the link because they go into a lot of sites and other references and discussion of it.
We've moved away from the semantics ages ago. That's old news now.
I think the game should be played.
You're posting stuff about definitions, but we've moved on from that. That was quite a while ago. I really want to move away from the definition argument.
Language scams on everybody else, and that's one way of calling you on it. But this one also discusses a lot of those side issues in a way that's educational and informative.
Hold on, let me get this. You guys are trying to convince Mace that child is a female? That's what you're trying to convince him of?
I mean, if you look at that child, you can see it's obviously male, can't you?
No, it looks like a
I
child.
wouldn't say obviously. I would guess it's male. I would, but I mean, clearly he has some condition. And so maybe...
Yeah, it's a disabled male.
Right, but I mean, I wouldn't say obviously. I would say male. I would say male out of just guessing, but I wouldn't say obviously
male. And the purpose
male.
of this show is to convince people that disagree with you otherwise onto your way of thinking. I think most people are not going to be convinced by this picture because they'll look at that and they'll see, oh yeah, he has a Y chromosome and he looks like a male. That kind of doesn't convince me that you could have a Y chromosome and be female.
Tell he has a Y chromosome. Is there a reason that
you can tell he has a Y chromosome? Look, you look at him and you just know that's male. Because you just look at him and you can see.
I'll break it down, Josie, real quick.
Hold on. Before that,
you guys break it down, I have one question. Also, Mace, just remember you are the moderator as well of your own show. I sent a message. I'm not sure if you saw it, but hang on. But before we continue, just make sure that your passion is not in calling names or anything like that. Make sure we stay within the rules of the Discord. And but yeah, keep the passion rolling towards the conversation because it's great. But
is it against
not attack each other? Yes, just get the fuck out of here if you're gonna do that.
It's actually correct that he's a limey.
I don't know what a limey is. All right, is there a reason that this child was chosen with a disability? Is that somehow the point of this conversation?
Because Mace wanted Challenge Doolittle to pull up a picture of phrase it again. Someone with a XY chromosome or ending in a Y chromosome that looked female or is female, whatever that means.
Have you ever seen a femboy? I could 100% show you some pictures.
After Doolittle said that.
The question would be, do they have the Y chromosome at the end?
After Doolittle sent this picture, not only did I say that looks like it's obviously male, he then read the article associated with them and confirmed that they were actually male. So my instinct was correct there.
Well, if you really want to test this, try the quiz they put in chat.
They call it an XXY boy, right? So, yeah, you're right. It's a boy. I mean, you're not wrong, but it's it's a lower dimension of classification. So
what are we trying to convince you of? I'm still what is the exact proposition of convincing you?
Well, my proposition is that there are only two genders, or in Andy's language, two biological sexes, and I think this picture was originally intended to convince me that there is in fact more than two biological sexes. But we then later discovered that he actually falls into the category of male, which is one of the two that already exist.
Would you agree these look like women?
Who?
The last two pictures I put in live text. Because both of those people 100% have a penis.
Yeah, so these people have done a very good job.
Contact information?
These people have done a very good job of presenting themselves as women, but if you strip off the makeup and the hair and just look at how they biologically look, regardless of how they present themselves, I think I could probably tell they were male, because I'd be able to see their penis and I'd be able to see their jawline and the broadness of their shoulders. It would just be obvious.
There's some people that
after you see their penises, what would your next move be?
To turn the other cheek. Both cheeks.
Oh yeah.
I'll tell you what. I need either one of their asses, whether they were a man or a female.
I could 100% like find a girl, like a trans girl that passes, and that you will, like, be like,
I'm not talking about transgenderism. I'm talking about biological sex. Transgenders don't change their biological sex.
When I say trans girls, I mean a biological man, somebody with an X and a Y.
Yes, but a trans woman is still male.
Yes, I agree. But they 100% to you would be like a female, like unless you put down their pants, you would 100% agree with me that that's a girl.
That's because I'm not looking at them. I'm looking at their clothes and their makeup and how they're presenting themselves. If I'm looking at an animal without clothes and makeup on, and I'm told, can you identify the gender of this animal? I will look at their genitalia and their bone structure, and I can determine whether it's male or female like that.
Well, there's some really effeminate men that happen to have turned trans, that have had, like, you know, the whole surgery thing done. That
like our good friend Jolly.
Exactly, yeah. That I'm sure I could. I've known me watch some porn videos, and all of a sudden, that like pulled a penis just comes out, and I'm like, what? No way! I would have sworn. You've never experienced.
Well, anyway,
that happened to me just the other day. Actually,
we have been doing this.
Like it's a possible thing to happen, man.
Just the other day. No, it happened. Like people are trying to trick you into that.
Does anyone have
100%? It's a joke. It's an online joke.
Does anyone have any
common online?
Okay.
Does anyone have any closing thoughts they'd like to push before I close up?
I know there was an Army engineer, who was the only person I knew who had test fired a Heckler and Koch G11 doing an evaluation at their factory, who I met years later at a bar local to
Loki,
me
is this relevant?
Of the group. And at that point, he had become a legal. She was wearing a dress, had been a relatively small guy, and wasn't wearing much makeup or anything, but presented as a female. And I did not know until she, as a legal female, biological male, was that person or wasn't female until after, the introduction and connecting it to, discussions where the transgender conversion had been discussed, peripheral to a whole bunch of other things over a period of years online.
Okay, cool.
So I would
anyway, that's enough now, Loki. I'm going to close up now.
Those judgments that you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, that's the Convince Me Otherwise show. I personally am not really convinced by the arguments that were presented, but that's just me. What were you convinced? People in the audience, let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thanks, Mace.